Welcome to Motherland Tales. We are so glad to have you here. Please subscribe to our channel and like and comment your favorite part of the story. Let's begin. Once upon a time, in the beautiful city of Onitsha, there lived a bright-eyed girl named Ngozi. She was the third child of Pastor Okafor and his devoted wife, Amaka. Their home was filled with laughter, love, and warmth, and Ngozi could always feel the protective embrace of her father's love. Pastor Okafor was the kind of father who would spend hours listening to his children, offering wise counsel and sharing stories from the Bible. Life seemed perfect, and Ngozi felt secure and cherished. But life, as it often does, took an unexpected turn. One fateful morning, her father fell ill. It wasn't the usual flu that passed quickly. This was something far more serious. Days turned into weeks, and the hospital visits became more frequent. Ngozi watched, helpless, as her father's once strong frame grew frail. His once reassuring voice grew weaker. Her mother, Amaka, tried to hold everything together, but her eyes betrayed the worry that kept her awake at night. One day the news came. Pastor Okafor passed away. Ngozi couldn't understand it. Her world crumbled. She felt like a piece of her heart had been ripped away. All she could remember was her mother's broken sobs, the wailing of distant relatives, and the many people who came to offer condolences. The grief was overwhelming, but there was one thing that remained clear in her mind: her mother's love. Amaka tried her best to shield her children from the harshness of their new reality, but it was impossible. They were now a family of 4, and the weight of the world was on her mother's shoulders. With her father gone, Amaka became a widow at only 30, and she fought to keep her family afloat. She sold food in the market, hawked clothes, and worked tirelessly day and night just to put food on the table. But no matter how hard she worked, it never seemed enough. Every night, when the children had gone to sleep, Amaka would weep quietly into her pillow, praying for strength. Ngozi often heard her mother's sobs, and the pain in her heart grew as she watched the woman who had once been so full of life slowly wither under the weight of despair. One fateful afternoon, Amaka's close friend, Aunty Neka, came to visit. Neka was a successful bank manager, well-dressed and confident. She had a son, Chidi, who was around Ngozi's age. Aunty Neka had always been kind to Ngozi whenever she visited, but that day there was something different in her demeanor. She saw the struggle in her friend's eyes and could no longer sit idly by. "I can't watch you suffer like this, Amaka," Neka said, her voice full of concern. "Let me take Ngozi with me. I will help raise her, provide for her education, and give her a future. You don't need to carry this burden alone." Amaka hesitated. She had always believed that her children should stay with her, that her love was enough to keep them safe. But deep down, she knew that she couldn't provide the life her children deserved. With a heavy heart, Amaka agreed, believing that Neka, her trusted friend, would care for Ngozi as her own. She called Ngozi over, her voice trembling. "My child," she said, tears in her eyes. "Life is so hard for us now. We don't have enough to eat, and I can't send you and your siblings to school. I don't want to let you go, but I think that your leaving will give you a better future. Please, my dear, go with Aunty Neka. Help her with Chidi. Be kind, be respectful, and don't do anything to make her dislike you. Don't take what doesn't belong to you. Don't disrespect her. Please, Ngozi, go with her." Ngozi's heart broke. She didn't want to leave her mother, but she knew her mother was sacrificing for her future. With a tearful goodbye, Ngozi packed her belongings and left the only home she had ever known, hoping that this new journey would bring her the education and life she had always dreamed of. But what awaited her in Neka's home was far from what she had imagined. From the very first moment Ngozi stepped into Neka's luxurious home in the city, she felt a coldness in the air. The house, though large and beautifully furnished, lacked warmth. There were no comforting sounds of laughter or shared moments of love. It was an imposing, cold space. Neka greeted her with a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "This is your room," Neka said curtly, as she opened a door to a small, dark room. She tossed Ngozi's clothes carelessly onto a dusty closet shelf, the fabric falling in a heap on the floor. "You'll sleep here," Neka added, motioning to the bare floor. "There's no bed for you. You'll have to make do. I don't have time to pamper you." Ngozi stood there, stunned. She had never been treated this way before. but she was determined to stay strong. Her mother had entrusted her to Neka's care, and she would do everything in her power to make her mother proud. Time passed, and Ngozi's life became a living nightmare. Aunty Neka rarely spoke to her unless it was to give an order. Ngozi was expected to do all the household chores, cleaning, cooking, and looking after Chidi, Neka's son. Chidi, a spoiled and unruly child, would often taunt her, calling her names and making fun of her. "You're just a servant here, Ngozi," he would sneer. "You're nothing." But the real cruelty came from Neka. She would often belittle Ngozi, making her feel small and insignificant. If Ngozi made even the smallest mistake, Neka would shout at her, calling her ungrateful and useless. And when Ngozi would cry, Neka would mock her, saying, "You think your mother's love will save you? I am your mother now, and in this house you are nothing but a burden." Ngozi, broken and defeated, longed for the comforting arms of her mother. But there was no way back now. She had to endure. Every night, as she lay on the cold floor, she would cry herself to sleep, praying for the day she could return home. The days stretched on, filled with endless chores, harsh words, and loneliness. Ngozi's spirit began to wither, and the bright, hopeful girl who had once dreamed of a better future now found herself fading into the shadows of despair. But deep within her, something began to stir, a quiet strength. She remembered her mother's words, "Don't disrespect her. Be kind, be respectful." And with that thought, a fire ignited in her heart. She would not let her auntie break her. She would not allow this cruelty to define her. Little did Neka know, she had underestimated the resilience of a girl who had already known the pain of losing everything. The wicked auntie had made a grave mistake. She had underestimated the power of a mother's love and the strength that lay within a girl who was willing to fight for a better future. As time went on, Ngozi began to silently plot her escape. She would find a way out of Neka's suffocating grasp and reclaim the happiness she had lost. And when the day came, it would be the start of a new chapter, one where she would no longer be a victim, but a survivor. The wicked auntie had no idea that Ngozi's journey was far from over. Weeks turned into months, and despite the cruelty she endured, Ngozi's determination only grew stronger. Each morning, she would wake early to complete her chores before Chidi and Nneka awoke. She worked tirelessly, her body aching, but her mind remained focused on her goal: to one day leave the suffocating walls of Nneka's house. In the quiet moments when Nneka was out or distracted, Ngozi would look out the window, her gaze drifting far beyond the concrete walls of the house, imagining herself in a life where she wasn't trapped by anger and cruelty. She knew she couldn't stay forever. One evening, as Ngozi swept the floor of the grand living room, Nneka entered with a smug look on her face. "I've been thinking," Nneka said, her voice dripping with condescension. "You've been here long enough. Maybe it's time you start pulling your weight." She paused, letting the words hang in the air. "I'll send you to work at the market. There's no point in me feeding and clothing you when you're not contributing. You'll earn your keep just like the other poor girls out there." Ngozi felt the sting of those words like a slap to her face, but she held her ground, silently nodding. It wasn't the first time Nneka had insulted her, but something in her snapped that evening. Her self-respect, which had been slowly chipped away, was suddenly set ablaze with a fire of defiance. "No more," she thought. "No more will I be your servant. I deserve more." That night, as Ngozi lay on the cold floor, she formulated a plan. She had saved every penny she could from the little chores Nneka occasionally gave her, though it wasn't much. But she had something more valuable than money: her mind, sharp and determined. She would use this to her advantage. The next day, while Nneka was busy with work, Ngozi seized her chance. She packed a small bag with what little she had: some clothes, the few coins she had earned, and a small piece of jewelry her mother had given her as a keepsake. She knew that escaping in the dead of night would be the safest option. Nneka would never expect it. But Ngozi's heart raced with fear as she crept through the back door, careful to avoid the servants and Chidi, who would certainly spoil her plan if they saw her. The city streets were unfamiliar, and her heart pounded as she navigated the dark alleys and busy main roads, always keeping to the shadows. She wasn't sure where she was going, but she knew she couldn't go back. She had to get as far away as possible from Nneka's grasp. After hours of walking, exhausted and terrified, Ngozi found herself at a small bus station. The city's bus routes were sprawling, but she knew one thing: she needed to go back home to Onitsha. Her heart ached at the thought of returning to the place where her father had died, but she knew that there was no place left for her in Neka's home. With trembling hands, she bought a bus ticket. She had just enough money, and after a long, bumpy ride, she arrived in Onitsha at dawn. She had no idea where to go or whom to turn to, but the first thing she did was make her way to her old neighborhood. She could almost hear the sound of her father's voice echoing in her mind, urging her to be strong, to keep going. When she reached the familiar street, she felt a sense of relief wash over her. It wasn't much, but it was home, the place where she had been loved, where memories of her father still lingered in the air. Maka, her mother, was stunned when she saw Ngozi standing at the door, ragged and tired, but alive. Tears streamed down Amaka's face as she pulled her daughter into a tight embrace, as if afraid to let go. "My child, oh my child," Amaka whispered, her voice breaking. "You're home, but what happened? Why did you leave?" Ngozi, still shaken, explained everything. How Neka had promised to help, but instead had turned her into a servant. How her life had been filled with cruel words and unbearable hardship. How she had finally escaped, knowing that she couldn't continue to live in such a toxic environment. Amaka listened, her face darkening with anger as she heard what her best friend had done to her precious daughter. "I never should have let you go," she said, guilt creeping into her voice. "I thought I was doing what was best for you, but I see now that I made a terrible mistake." Ngozi comforted her mother, assuring her that there was no need for guilt. "I'm just happy to be home," she said, holding her mother's hand. "We'll make it. Together, Mama, we'll make it." The journey back home wasn't easy. They didn't have much, but they had each other. Amaka's strength, now renewed by the return of her daughter, made her more determined than ever to give her children a better life. She sold the little food she could make, and Ngozi helped wherever she could, using the skills she had learned over the months. Though they lived humbly, their love for one another filled their small home with warmth and hope. News of Ngozi's escape spread quickly. Neka, furious and humiliated, began making threats. She had connections, and she would stop at nothing to get her hands on Ngozi again. She even tried to accuse Amaka of stealing from her, spreading lies and rumors that threatened to tear their small family apart. It was then that Amaka, afraid for her children's safety, made a bold decision. She would take Ngozi and her siblings far from the city, out of reach from Neka's vengeful grip. With the little savings they had, they left Onitsha for a quiet village, far away from the prying eyes of the city. As the years passed, Ngozi blossomed in the peaceful village. She was no longer the broken girl who had left Neka's house in the dead of night. She had grown strong, wise, and independent. With the love of her mother and the lessons she had learned from her painful journey, she thrived, eventually going to the university and graduating. In the end, the wicked aunty, Neka, was never heard from again. Her life remained cold and empty, filled with lies and bitterness. Ngozi's life was filled with love, light, and the promise of a bright future, one she had earned through sheer will and determination. The moral of this story is that no matter how little you have, you can still live a joyful and fulfilling life. Parents should have the number of children they can responsibly care for, and if you find yourself in a position of privilege or power, you should treat others with kindness and respect, not cruelty. Please subscribe to our channel and like for more wonderful